Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in to today's program. My name is Ben Epstein, and I want to welcome you all again to the Epstein Files. We have a lot of stuff to talk about today. There are three main topics that I want to discuss today. The first one is going to be Malaysia's sudden U turn from the full BRICS membership, as well as Egypt's bet on its new city and if its economy will be able to withstand it. And we were going to cover if China's new tactic will turn the de-dollarization debate on its head. So feel free, so stick around and into what we're going to be covering. And if you guys have any important news article that you want to share with me that we want to cover for the next week episode, feel free to send them our way. We actually have a you submit the last story. So I'm really excited to share that with you all. Okay, so now let's open the Epstein files. So here I'm going to share with you. So right now, why we see that in the uh, ASEAN meeting with or the latest summit in Busan, South Korea, we had a lot of important developments, namely with the United States and China. But what sort of went on the radar was Malaysia's sort of halt on becoming a full partner or a full member in the BRICS. So you can see that why I made this sudden U-turn. So months ago, we saw countries like Russia and China, their ministers promoting Malaysia both meets the criteria to become a BRICS member and their overall excitement for Malaysia to join the BRICS as a full country. Now, with all this momentum, we were really thinking Malaysia was actually going to join, but in an interview with Malaysia's prime minister, they actually decided that they were going to halt entry as a full member and instead just remain as a partner country. So here in this from the Malaysia Times, from he was talking about how for now it's sufficient for Malaysia to remain a partner country to BRICS. And while the question from the reporter seemed odd, if we think about the back channels and everything else going on behind the scene, we can sort of understand why Malaysia is making this calculation. So, in addition to signing their own free trade agreement, they also went out of their way to sign a reciprocal trade agreement with the United States. And if we see that they decide to remain a partner country to BRICS, we see that they're sort of weighing the impact on BRICS completely, as well as the trade agreement with the United States. So here we can sort of see Malaysia's trade balance was as of 2023. This data is the Office of Economic Complexity, and it's talking about how here the majority of its exports and imports, while it comes from countries like China and Singapore, very much ASEAN countries, a big export destination is the United States. Over 10% of their imports or of their exports goes to the United States. And if we look specifically at what the important exports for Malaysia are, it's integrated circuits. And integrated circuits are vital for semiconductor manufacturing and the semiconductor devices that the United States is doing whatever it can to a leg up ahead on with respect to China. So you kind of see that not just Malaysia's role with integrated to the United States, but also the fact that it made up more than 20% of Malaysia's market share on global trade, integrated circuit alone. They are a tried and true important developer and manufacturer for these integrated circuits. The United States is doing what it can to preserve that relationship, maintain that supply chain from Malaysia. And if we kind of see here, for Malaysia's sake, why would they opt out of this membership? If we see here, Malaysia is located right here, but we also consider that there is an ongoing war here, civil war in Myanmar, combined with the conflict that we saw recently between Thailand and Cambodia, as well as the protests that have been going on in the Philippines and Indonesia. I'm willing to assume that Malaysia is fearful of the consequences of joining BRICS altogether, right? Donald Trump has constantly threatened 100% tariff BRICS countries, and he's been doing whatever he can to dismantle this relationship. We could talk about the pressure he put on India for the tariff on agricultural exports, to the tariff war that he was conducting with Brazil, and obviously everything he's doing with respect to China and Russia. This is all to break apart this relationship because Trump and the United States realize that BRICS is gaining momentum, and the more countries that join it, the more that it will accelerate in developing technological innovation and capacity building for area like technology, as well as artificial intelligence and the like. And the more these countries join, the more they will promote sharing knowledge and their expertise in these fields that will basically make them reliant on the United States. So so what do you guys think of overall picture for Malaysia? They're trying to balance the costs that it would be, the potential tariffs and also the potential political consequences of joining BRICS as a member. But you can also see that they are fully in tuned and ingrained in the ASEAN environment, and they will be able to obviously have no trade barriers with the ASEAN countries, but how it's going to affect Malaysia joining BRICS is something that they're considering. And I want to know what your guys' thoughts are on that. And so for let's think about now let's just take away from Malaysia for a second, but let's consider other potential countries that are interested in joining BRICS. For example, Thailand, or other smaller countries that are going about balancing the relationship um, between the United States and with countries like China, Russia, where they have these vital trade relationships that they need to maintain, and they don't want to choose one side or the other. I think that's something that is uh, all of these small countries or even just emerging nations want to avoid. So, how they're trying to toe the line between the relationship between BRICS countries, or if we want to, be, with China, for example, with the relationship with the United States and the United States' attitude towards not just China and Russia and the like, but also BRICS. So I think Malaysia in this case is sort of taking a step out of Vietnam's playbook. And I wrote about this in the Think BRICS Substack that I encourage you guys to read, that sort of goes into this sort of bamboo diplomacy and how Vietnam has been able to both court China's investment, also the United States investment, and they've been able to perfectly balance relationships while Vietnam is also becoming a BRICS member. So for Malaysia, Thailand, and a lot of smaller countries that uh, understand that they need to balance this relationship, I think this is why that they are not opting into the BRICS partnership yet. But it also shows that Malaysia is an important supply chain partner for the United States for these integrated circuits and semiconductor devices. Okay, if anyone has any questions, I will move towards the next article or the next topic. Sorry. more countries should join BRICS and boycott the US. Well, it's the thing is about that. I, Kij- Kajitugwa 7. I apologize. I did not pronounce that right. You, you know, it's not easy for countries to essentially to basically completely disregard the United States because for one thing, and it's the same thing with China. BRICS is not diametrically opposed to the United States. And for another thing, the United States is a important market. That's the same reason that China has been going and not. Uh, that's why China has essentially held their cards. They want to keep the United States market for Chinese businesses and everything. They believe in if I make you rich, we both get rich, and that's part of why countries altogether don't want to completely abandon the relationship because you can imagine the shock if I'm importing a lot of soybeans from the United States, for example, and I understand their relationship with and basically their actions across the world. And if I said I don't want to buy any soybeans from you anymore, that's going to have a massive shock on citizens as a whole. So, to your point about a band relationship, I think what we're seeing is a slow shift. A lot of these countries are moving very, very slowly because they know the impact of these of sanctions or also these shocks and how it reverberates and how it really gets down to affecting the lives of their citizens and their people. Okay. And so before we move on, guys, I meant to do this before I started the first topic, but I was a little bit too excited. I do want to share with you guys my stat of the week. And my stat of the week is just something that I want you guys to think about. And it's relevant to our overall discussion, but it's something for all of us to keep in mind. So the number is 8.6 billion dollars. So $8.6 billion. What do you guys think that stat is in reference to? And um, just feel free to put your guesses in the comment section, and we're going to move on to the next topic. Yeah, Don Hooligan. Many are dependent on money. Money cannot survive without money. Addicts cannot survive without money, and that's very, very true. And how people are dependent on fiat currency is something that is really reshaping this entire decade because of everyone's need for cash. So I definitely understand what you mean. Okay. So, okay. So now I want to talk about our next topic here. So, yeah, yeah. So, 8.6 over 8.6 billion. Sorry, guys. I meant to show you guys the stat. This is so the stat of the day is point 0.6 over 8.6 billion dollars. So let me know what you guys think that that is most in reference to. Okay. So now let's move on to our next topic, and our topic is going to be Egypt. So Egypt has been the recipient of a lot of investment, right? A lot of investment, not just from countries like the United States, but also we've recently seen that China pledges to invest over $7 billion into the Egyptian economy into important areas as electric vehicle manufacturing and also logistics for the construction of their new administrative capital. And this administrative capital is was originally priced at over $58 billion to construct. And while this investment for the city and the reasons behind it are incredibly important, and we can understand why Egypt is moving that way, I'm going to explain to you guys why I don't think Egypt's. I think that this play is not going to work out for them in the long term. So, similar to Malaysia, I want to just show you what the trade balance is, both for their imports and their exports, with respect to countries, right? So, what's really important here is you can see that Egypt's exports are very diversified. Between within the Middle East we have, or I guess West Asia if you want to call it that, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Turkey biggest, are the biggest export markets. You can see countries like India that are agreeing to partner with on agriculture and things of that nature. But what's really important about their exports and what they're trying to bring or trying to show is the biggest exports for them is tourism. So recently, Egypt has finally opened what they call the Grand Egyptian Museum, and this is going to have a lot of famous, artifacts that we bought, with the king's tomb, and over 50,000 artifacts are going to be in the Grand Egyptian Museum. That helped to construct this museum, you know, China, for example, but also the United States, and a lot of big countries were to help support this. This museum that's highlighting Egyptian, in Egypt as one of the biggest and powerful, influential countries of all time, right? It just showed that their biggest export right now is tourism. And this is all a big bill to incentivize people to come down and check out Egypt, right? So putting all of this money into this Grand Museum and this big city. But what is the problem here with them using tourism really as their biggest export? Well, I'm going to name you guys three reasons I think are the most important. The first reason that I don't think this is going to is the ongoing refugee crisis with respect to their neighbors. Second big part is the debt that Egypt is currently on. And the third thing is that the problem with the city, the new administrative city design itself, and how that's going to hurt Egypt down the line. So here's just a super basic map on what Egypt is, and obviously, what I did not show here, its next door neighbor to the left side is Libya. So their border are essentially Libya, their west, Sudan, Libya, which has been on an ongoing civil war in their country, has essentially devastated ever since NATO's bombing of Libya and the Libyan civil war that followed. You have that to their border to the west. In the south, we have the ongoing Sudan civil war. You guys have been looking into it as much as I have. In a devastating civil war, there have been hundreds of thousands of civilians displaced, causing this refugee crisis. Many people have been slaughtered because of it. And so that conflict is not seeing an end window soon. So they have to worry about that to the south. And then lastly, to the northeast, we have Israel and Palestine and everything that's going on into Gaza. Israel recently just shut the border, the border between Egypt and Israel. So they're essentially dealing with refugee crisis across all over their borders, and they don't have the capacity, understandably so, to really deal with the influx of refugees, and they need to, and all of the investment into these areas. The refugee crisis is going to make it a lot harder for them to maintain its security on its borders, but also improve on the development of these investments, right? Because if I'm a country and I'm looking to invest in your country, right? If I'm an investor into Egypt, see the refugees, see the ongoing conflicts around them, and it makes it Egypt by nature that much more cautious to invest in. Because what happens if something happens between Sudan and Egypt, and it makes Egypt's prospects for growth a lot more questionable. So that's the first part. The second part is the basically the economy itself and the amount of debt it's in. So for Egypt, one thing that's super important is that they import the most amount of wheat out of any country. I'm talking $4 billion annually. They're importing wheat, and it was mainly from countries like Russia and Ukraine, for example. But because of the special military operation in Ukraine that's going on between Russia and Ukraine, it's made their supply for wheat a lot less uh, a lot less predictable. We don't know how that's impacting their wheat imports, and it's a very important, staple crop. They need this for people. So not only is the biggest import essentially up in the air as they're not able to produce it domestically, but let's consider their ongoing debt right now. $8.6 billion is the amount of debt owed to the IMF. It's more than double of the next leading country in Africa, in Kenya, and the other country that owes more debt to the IMF is Argentina. And I talked about it a couple weeks ago, but I don't need to explain the precarious Argentina's economy has been because of the amount of debt they're owing to the IMF. So when one thing that's important is when debt from the IMF, basically contingent on them on exercising their policies, right? And the thing is for them is austerity. And austerity is just cutting social services, cutting regulations, and um, you know, doing everything to basically bring your budget deficit to zero. You know, and the problem is that when doing these austerity measures and cutting social services and do this, they also have to devalue their currency. Here, it's kind of hard to tell, but we could see that the 10-year between the Egyptian to the United States dollar has dropped nearly 90% from 2014 now to 2024. And now that basically have devalued their currency to some point, their inflation has already charted over 20%. So not only from their economic sake that their purchasing power for their citizens has gone down dramatically ever since 2017, you'd argue, but also the fact that Egypt's economy is beholden to make these austerity measures and cut social services and cut the needs for citizens to pay back this debt. But this $8.6 billion debt, there's no way they're going to be able to pay this off, especially with their currency devalued. And that's why you see Egypt in the precarious situation they're in. So, with all of this debt and important things like wheat supply at risk, they really need to go above and beyond to encourage people to come and stay in Egypt. Remittances are at an all-time high because people do not have the purchasing power, and they don't have the services to really want to stay there. So the last reason is about this capital, this new administrative capital. So let me give you guys a little bit of back as to why they're making this capital to begin with. So when we talk about Cairo, or when we talk about Egypt, the main thing we're talking about is Cairo. Cairo is the capital, and it's basically located very right up here. Basically, the people icon is here because every below it is the Sahara Desert. So growing anything basically below Cairo is nearly impossible, and everyone you could see is reliant on the Nile River that are living that far south because they can't grow anything there. So now what the president DC has decided is want to essentially make this administrative capital that is going to be about a 12-hour walk from a 12-hour walk from the new capital, the old capital, I'm sorry, to the new administrative capital. And they have outlined the plans where they're not only make the biggest building in the world, the Opsco Capital Tower, also want to make the biggest grand mosque, which should have over 100,000 people that could help attendance, the biggest cathedral church, a new stadium that is supposed to hold 80 to 90,000 people, a new military headquarters, um, a brand new medical facility and medical city, and the biggest building in the world. This is basically their magnum opus, trying to put everything here and see if it sticks. It's a lot of big promises for this Capitol building to go up and actually attract people. But if we consider the fact that it's basically reliant on all investment in capital, it's not going to work for the Egyptian people. For one thing, there is no transportation development right now from the old capital to the new capital. So if you wanted to go to the new capital, you're going to need a car, and a lot of Egyptian citizens right now do not have a car. So you're automatically making city harder for people who are strong to actually go and migrate to. And then we consider the amount of basically the scale of these projects, right? And all of the money that they're already indebted to with the IMF. And basically the policies that they've had to do to basically boarded that debt with these austerity policies is making people that more worse off. So gotten so bad that we can see here that Egypt has ceded multiple strategic territories between both Saudi Arabia, where we could see these little bases here, Sanafir and Tehran. In 2017, Egypt agreed to legally cede these territories to Saudi Arabia, and behold, they got extra funding from Saudi Arabia to, um, to help this project. And they're not the only ones either. The UAE has already is the biggest lender of the money for this for this new administrative capital. I'm talking $35 billion of investment. Why would they donate 35 or 35 billion dollars? It's because they're selling land to the UAE, very strategic land that they basically do not have a choice in to get money for this project. So don't think this I don't think Egypt is in a good situation right now because they're basically stuck in this infinite death loop with the IMF. We see how the policies have already affected its people with devaluing their currency and not even making the capital accessible to them. And they need to go out and sell strategic parts of their territory to fund this project. It just seems like a recipe for disaster. But there are multiple countries, both in BRICS, but also juxtaposed in the United States, that do not want to see Egypt fail. So, what do you guys think? Do you guys think the new capital city will succeed? Do you think Egypt can get out of this infinite death loop it is with IMF? Let me know what your guys' comments are. And after that, we will move on to the last topic. Give me just a second, guys. I need to charge my computer because it's going to die on me, and I do not want to do that to you. Egypt exports spices to Asia. Yes, that's true. That is very important for Egypt in general. But when I think about their imports, a lot of their imports are vital to their city as a whole. I'm talking refined petroleum. I'm talking about rice, obviously, things that they need to uh, partner with other countries like India, for example. I think I can actually find the article where they talk about, um, agricultural cooperation because of the vulnerabilities that Egypt's economy has. If importing $4 billion annually, that's that's a very big problem. Okay, cool. So before we on to our next story, guys, I just want to highlight. You guys have already saw it, but that's the week, the $8.6 billion. That's how much Egypt owes to the IMF, the International Monetary Fund. And if you look, there's a great book by Michael called Superimperialism, and it talks about how the IMF was created and how its policies are designed to keep countries beholden to debt while simultaneously making their citizens worse off because of these policy ideas. Okay, so I think we can move on right now. So now let's talk about our final story. And our final story actually comes from this was recommended by a viewer. So to Todd Bertrand, I want to sincerely thank you so much for recommending this. This was not on my radar, but it officially is now. So the story is that China has begun issuing the U.S. denominated sovereign bonds in Saudi Arabia, and just just take a breath, like just take a step back and just kind of think about this for a second. This experiment that China seems to be doing. China issued $2 billion and United States denominated, not their own, not the yuan, United States denominated sovereign bonds in Saudi Arabia. So now this seems rather weird, right? Like why would China issue bonds that are denominated in the United States? De-dollarization is something that is long been touted by not just countries, but those who do not want to be dependent on the United States dollar, but also on the United States um, led institutions being fearful of the using those tools again in a political sense. So why would they issue this debt in dollars? So one thing that's really interesting is that the interest rate for these bonds is actually a lot closer to the United States Treasury bonds than you would have already assumed. So the difference between the interest here is 0.1 to 3%. Like this is 1 to 3 basis points. So that lack of difference essentially means China can essentially um, China now able to borrow money in United States dollars, about equivalent to the United States' ability to borrow in United States dollars. Like that sounds super weird. Like China now can basically borrow at nearly the same rate as the United States would already do so. Now, why would they do this in Saudi Arabia? Well, I could immediately think about the petrodollar system. Right? Like the petrodollar system, if you guys aren't aware, it was essentially during President FDR's time. He agreed with Saudi Arabia to buy Saudi oil in exchange for doing it only so in American dollars. So now we can see because this relate because it was always dependent on the United States dollars. So now China can operate as another manager of the dollar's liquidity. And now it can right in the heart of the dollar system. So now Saudi Arabia could borrow this money from China, but the debt is going to be denominated in the dollar. So if we were to like if we were able to scale this up from a $2 billion to something like $20 billion or something like that, and it works successfully, this implies that China would effectively be competing with the United States Treasury Department in the global dollar market. Means that instead of Saudi Arabia, if they were to agree to this, instead of recycling the dollars into the United States Treasury, simultaneously can uh, recycle those dollars back to the Chinese government. So why would they? Why would China do this? Talking about the de-dollarization aspect. Why would they want to take this over? Especially considering that trade surplus with the United States at this point is going to expect to be $940 billion. Like they're awash in dollars. They don't need more dollars. Well, I think there are a couple reasons why they're doing this, and it's actually going to blow your mind when I explain this. The first is they now are competing with the United States on the US Treasury market. So for China to be looked at as an alternative manager to the dollar, and if you're going to compare investing in China now to the United States, it's a night and day difference. The United States is completely unpredictable on investments, amongst other things, and that makes it a lot harder for investors to, frankly, invest in the United States unless they're being, coerced into doing so or threatened or anything like that. But with China, there's a lot more stability in their operations, both from a bureaucratic and government standpoint, but also from an economic standpoint. China is already proving to be a much better uh, to invest in. But we see when they have these dollars, right, and they're competing with them on the market, what if they turn around and use all the dollars they have and collected and help countries in debt to the United States dollar out? When we talk about this, I'm thinking about the Belt and Road Initiative. This is sort of a project China has done all around the world, and it's sort of a sort of a Silk Road. It's meant to build infrastructure to for countries and unlock certain corridors and help connect countries within their own regions. But within the country, it's to improve, right? Like if you're an emerging country, the first step you need to have is the solid infrastructure to actually build the capacity to, your economy and expand, your output essentially. So with this, there are 152 countries that are already a part of the Belt and Road Initiative. And a lot of these countries are in a lot of debt with the United States. So, suppose China has all, $900 billion, they could agree on loans for the Belt and Road Initiative or other projects like that, while simultaneously being to pay down their debt in the United States dollar. So not only is China gonna would be making itself an intermediary at the heart of the dollar system, not only is there a way for them to do this that would help other countries to get out of the debt trap that they're in right now with the United States, which is a big reason why countries are so beholden to the United States with because of this debt, but also able to promote their own projects like the Belt and Road Initiative is something that's insane. Not they've completely flipped the de-dollarization debate on its head. People have often talked about a global BRICS currency, a BRICS dollar. But one thing that I find very interesting is China's said we do not want to be the reserve currency because for the reserve currency, their big thing is you have to have no capital controls, and China wants to maintain capital controls. So now they're able to do this, keep their capital controls intact, but also have a massive influence of how the United States dollar is going to be spent, and and basically uh, make they are a much better investment option than the United States dollar. So, what can like the United States do in this case? There's when we think about this, like they could do something like just immediate sanctions outright for debt that is classified like this. But we've already talked about the effect that the sanctions will do nothing more urge those countries to go out and do it again. Not only are unilateral sanctions illegal, shown by the United Nations that these sanctions are illegal, but also the fact that it just shows these countries, like they did with the SWIFT system, that political interference will make investing in the United States much worse. So they can't put sanctions on them. What if the Federal Reserve like raises interest rates for these treasuries and makes them more attractive? Well, that kind of runs into a problem of the United States $38 trillion debt and their massive deficits. So if they do this, the the interest on these payments are going to skyrocket, and that could even force an odd like a recession immediately. So they can't really improve. They can't raise the interest rate. It's going to make the recession imminent. It would make the problem that much worse. And one other option you could even argue is restricting China's ability to restrict their ability to clear transactions, but doing that is like punching in the nuclear codes for the global financial system that completely destroy the dollar's role as the global reserve currency. And that's what Trump and the United States has been trying to keep this entire time is the United States as the reserve currency and making sure it's the most dominant means of transactions around the world. So, what do you guys think of development? Do you think that the United States can counter the latest denominated debt in US dollars? Do you think that they're going to create a avalanche of US denominated debt in the future? And do you think that there's something the United States can really do about this? Yeah, Russia has dumped a lot of its debt right now, and that's very important. That's one big reason that they've been able to become basically able to um, pivot their economic integration from Europe to Eurasia to BRICS, but also countries in obviously like Central Asia, West Asia, that whole Asian region. They're able to integrate that much more because they're not as reliant on the United States debt or not beholden to it, I should say. And that's a big reason that everyone is trading in their own currencies rather than using the United States dollar for a very similar reason. Yeah, China is the smarter choice in this case. Cater indica. I mean, that's what I personally think. But I think that there is when we think about how other BRICS countries are going to react to this, especially considering the uh, their varied relationship with the United States, and if they will basically try to, um, how they will react to it. So I'm really sure because this is incredibly new information. How the United States reacts to this, I think will or to this issue is going to be very important for how it'll impact things for years. And I think with that, guys, I am going to close the Epstein files for today. I really appreciate everyone joining in the comment section. There were a lot of really interesting comments that I didn't get to highlight, but I found very interesting the same. So I do want to thank you so much for commenting and watching. And please be sure to like and subscribe to the Thick Bricks channel if you want to see more content like this. And please be sure to add your own news stories that you think are incredibly relevant and you want us to discuss next time. With that, guys, I'm closing the Epstein files today, and I want to thank you all for watching.